today we're talking about the Lola Woods, which I have I have a comic of here. It's got some spooky deer woman in the back,
Yeah, you
which
found
is
it?
which is so good. Yes, I found it. Cool. So the Lola Woods is from 2020, and it is about when your memories are stolen, what would you give to remember? Follow L and V as they search for answers to the question everyone else forgot. Shudder to think Pennsylvania is plagued by a mysterious illness that eats away at the memories of those affected by it. Elle and Octavia are two best friends who find themselves the newest victims of this disease after waking up in a movie theater with no memory of the past few hours. As Elle and V dive deeper into the mystery behind their lost memories, they realize the stories of their town hold more dark truth than they could have imagined. It's up to Elle and V to keep their town from falling apart, to keep the world safe from Shudder to Think's monsters. It's written by Carmen Maria Machado, which I explained a few times now I am obsessed with. So,
Yeah.
and this was the first thing I read by them and was like, wow, they're amazing. So hopefully you'll read it and also be inspired. Um,
Mm.
so The Lola Woods quickly became one of my all-time favorite horror comics. It features BIPOC queer girls, which I was like, already it's amazing. And I really resonated with like the blend of horror and just societal issues, which is, what we do here on the show.
Mhm.
So the story highlights the toxicities and impact of generational trauma and the patriarchy on our communities. And as explained, it follows two best friends, Elle and Octavia, otherwise known as V, who wake up in their small local theater with entire blocks of time missing from their minds. They do not know what happened before they woke up or why there is dirt and mud on their shoes. Where did they
Mhm.
go? And part of them is concerned. There's like a reaction from like a local boy who works there where they're like, this doesn't seem quite right. Whereas another of this duo is quick to want to forget and just move on. Like nothing happened, nothing to see, nothing to do, nothing to see. Let's just
Yeah.
go. Their town is full of questionably spooky things that no one quite acknowledges. It really, when I was like, the fact that like no one quite acknowledges the horror parts of it, like there's like skinless men. And they show up, and it's
Oh
not
god.
like, okay, we go talk to the authorities. Like, none of that happens. Instead, it's just like, oh, there they are again. And make
Oh,
sure you
yeah.
just. It's all about like take these precautions so these things don't happen to you because those men are inevitable. And so it really reminded me of
Mm.
Appalachia and how people there are always like, if you see or hear anything scary, no, you didn't. Where they're
Yeah.
like, if you're walking through the woods and someone's calling your name, no, you didn't. If you hear a
Yeah.
child crying in the woods, no, you didn't. Okay, you have shut all your curtains. I was like, I need to go to Appalachia. I was like, I want to
No,
visit
you
because I
don't.
love trouble. I'm not going to answer, but I want to
Yeah,
be Becky.
okay.
I want to be Becky.
No, Gabe, stop.
It
Why?
really
Why?
is so ridiculous. Every time I watch those TikToks of people like, there's like one of a girl and she's like walking and she hears literally, it just sounds like a guy. And I was like, it's definitely a guy out there, but he's just like, hey, hey. And I was like, that
No.
sounds like such a regular human. I would have been like, what? I don't know. Totally turned around. Not like I live in the
You
city.
don't
People call you like,
respond.
what's going on? Right? Like, I'm not in the woods. So,
Oh, I also
um,
don't respond when someone says hey to me if I don't know them. I'm like, "I'm
that's
walking.
true. I'm always like,
Goodbye."
was that for me? Um,
No, it wasn't, Gabe, run. Okay,
so
continue.
this town reminds me of that because it's very much like everybody knows that things are crazy. Everyone
Yeah.
knows that there's bad stuff out there that other people would be like, what is going on? But you don't respond to it. You're not allowed to respond to it. Because the entire town operates on this idea that if we don't acknowledge the harm, then it isn't actually harming us, which isn't true.
Mhm.
It's just kind of like, oh, If we don't say anything about it, then there's no problem. There
Mhm.
are creatures in the woods shown hauntingly beautiful in the graphic novels, thanks to the artist Danny, including rabbits with human eyes, deer women, skinless men, and the truly terrifying sinkholes that occur within young girls. One of which opens up in the middle of V's girlfriend. And it's
Mm.
at the end of like one of the first chapters. You just see like the sinkhole opens up, and it's just like the next chapter, they don't talk about it. she's like
Yeah.
she's like so freaked out. She doesn't even talk to her girlfriend. And then later we find out what happened. And you're just like, it adds to like all the issues of this town. Like it's
Yeah,
definitely
on
just one of
brand for
the
them not acknowledging problems.
yeah. It's like, and you're just like left like, wait, no, no, what? Wait, go back to that. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Um, and the town just exists in such an odd place of bizarre occurrences that you can't even point to the culprit. And at one point, the two girls encounter the deer with the head of a woman and later ponder where she came from, saying, maybe someone effed up a spell, or maybe it came out of the crevice in the park. And you're like, well, sure, just casually. And then V
Everyone has one
responds,
of those crevices in the park. It's
and you're like,
no big
like,
deal.
just say it, and then, like, he's like, "Oh, well, maybe we should tell someone." And then Elle
No.
explains, "What? And set off a curfew like last year? Forget it. I don't feel like evading monsters and cops at the same time. My legs are not that long, dude." And that's, like, at the beginning, like, this is the first time you see this dear woman, and you're like, "What?" And they're like, "Well, it would be a hassle to talk about not only this dear woman, but just, like, have to deal with police." And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah. Um,
Fair.
and
They
this
got enough
conversation
problems, I guess.
and like yeah, it's that conversation and approach to the peculiar sets the tone for the very complicated town of Shudder to Think that is plagued by monsters and obviously the true horrors, which is men and
Yeah.
corruption, right?
Ugh.
And so just like them, they're clearly a product of their environment. They're like, oh,
Mhm.
well, okay. Shudder the Thing, Pennsylvania is where the story takes place. And this town is a reimagining of Pennsylvania's own Centralia. And it's pretty clearly that. I'll explain some of the similarities too. But for those of you who don't know, Centralia is an old coal mining borough in near Ghost Town. Its population declined from 1,000 in 1980 to 5 residents in 2020 because a coal mine fire has been burning beneath the borough since 1962. And as Kat will explain, is not even the most interesting part of this. And on an
Yeah.
article on DC.com titled The Monsters and Men of the Lolo Woods by Juliet Bennett Ryla, they explain there are conflicting stories as to how the fire began. Some say firefighters set the town dump on fire to clean it up, during which the fire spread through an unsealed opening into an abandoned coal mine below. Others say the fire started when someone dumped hot coals or ash in a trash pit. In the 1980s, after a sinkhole that belched lethal levels of carbon monoxide nearly swallowed a 12-year-old boy, most residents accepted federal relocation money and skipped town. Some refused, stubbornly declaring Centralia their home, but today there are fewer than 10 remaining residents. It's like, yeah, five in 2020. I do think people are
Yeah.
coming back. Um, it is deemed I safe to live in now. I think I saw that
Got ya.
somewhere, but I don't think like there's not anything there because it was a coal town and now that industry just is not working. So,
Yeah.
again, something that Kat will talk about in their section. So, there are other troubling histories that shadow the town of Centralia, which Kat will discuss. And this includes the poor treatment of the mine workers and the inevitable uprisings and revolts by the Molly Maguires. And Machado references them briefly in the story and makes other connections between the fictional and real on fire town throughout. It's like a
Yeah.
little brief nod, but she mentions the town's proximity to Philadelphia and even tells tale of a boy falling victim to the fires swallowed by a sinkhole. You know, and also like mentions like what happened to make the town set on fire, and it's very clearly one of the guesses of what happened to
Mhm.
Centralia. So it's like it's very on the nose. This is Centralia. The environmental stresses and social issues of the real Centralia permeate the pages of the graphic novel quite well. You can catch that all throughout the entire book. Residents suffer ailments due to the mines, including bootleg mines set up in their own basements. So people trying to get in on the profits of the coal mines without having to work for those higher up problematic people, which we learn about,
Yeah.
were creating their own access to those mines in their own homes, um, which is crazy. Like in this story, I don't think people
Yeah,
had
they do
bootleg
that in the
mines.
real place too, bootleg
They
mines,
did.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it was like,
I don't know if it's
um,
out of their homes, but people, like, went in there without any regulations or training. They were like, "Let
yeah,
me just
just
get some coal for myself."
which is so funny because sidebar, but in Riverdale season 5, when they're adults, they like discover there's like a uh is at some point they discover that there's some type of element or thing that's in the under the groves that is worth a lot of money, unobtainium kind of thing. And at one
Mhm.
point they're like, oh, we're just gonna send a handful of men to the mines, and there's like no like there's not even a canary in there, like there's so like. And then
Yeah.
at one point Cheryl just has like, she takes in this young queer girl who's like a high schooler who are like parents kicked out, and she's like, yes, I'll take this girl under my wing. She has her working in her coal mine, like just her. Like,
Talk
what? The
about
show's crazy.
unionless. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's that show. I can't. One day we'll talk about it because it's wild. Anyway, these ones have bootleg mines, and one of them is in a basement because this older woman who's at like a retirement home, Elle goes to visit her,
Mhm.
like she brings her dog around to visit the older folks, and so this woman explains that she has blackened lungs because she lived her whole life inhaling the fumes, never knowing that air wasn't supposed to smell like it's on fire. She just
Wow.
didn't know better, like her whole life, you don't know that's wrong. And then now she's suffering from it. Like she can
Mhm.
never leave because it's in her, right? Um, and Shudder to Think is also on fire, but its residents refuse to leave. And as terrifying as it is to have their town burning below, the real horrors come from the town's curse. Because many years ago, the town was plagued by a strange ailment. Women in the town had a tendency to lose time, much like our protagonists. They would wake up in strange places and in strange ways, with no recollection of how they got there, what had been done to them, or by whom. And just as the spooky creatures in the woods go unspoken of, so too do these occurrences. And the girls begin investigating and make some jarring discoveries about the town. And I truly do not want to spoil this book because I want people to read it. It's a quick read. I've read it twice because I was like, I need a refresher for this episode. So I read it again in one night. It's very like quick. It's a graphic novel, so it's a lot of pictures. It's a lot of like looking at it. It's beautifully illustrated, and just Carmen Maria Machado's like prose and just the way that she explains things is really like captivating, and you'll just be like in it. Like you're going to be like so interested in what the heck is going on because she's just a great storyteller, flat out. So please support a local comic shop and grab the comics and just give it a read and then come back. You can skip over to cat section to hear about the actual Centralia because it's very interesting situations there, especially now when we're thinking about like labor unions and protests and such with the um, train operators. So, still doing it. Turns out, people aren't as liberal as they said they were. Anyway, read the
Oh,
book. And
classic. That's just, like, all the time.
like everything, like you think, yeah, you think we learned by now. I think it's crazy that you have to explain to anyone that unions are good, except for police unions. Those ones are
I mean,
not.
it's a product of the schooling system. Like, they intentionally underfund schools so that people don't actually know, and they defund, like, critical race theory and other things that would
Mm-hmm.
actually tell people about these things purposefully so that they're ignorant, and then they're just like, "Well, let's not disrupt society to make change.
Yeah.
We've only done this, so let it continue." Very much just what this is about.
Yeah, and it's also this like idea of like it's always been that way, but it hasn't. Like this is all new. Like in the grand scheme of things, this
Yeah.
is new. It was a test. We were trying it out. It doesn't work. We do something different. Why are we not doing that? Like that's how you're
'Cause they're
supposed to
like, "Oh, we've never
approach.
done it before, so let's not do it." It's like, that's literally what now is. Because we didn't do it before, we're doing it now. Just because it's unprecedented, maybe that's a good thing, friends.
Yeah, clearly
Oh, well,
this
I don't know,
bad.
man.
Something
We're
else
not in
might be
charge of the
good.
government, so
Yeah. But those who are, listen, what read this book, okay? Read this graphic novel and ask yourself some questions. So, I'm going into spoilers town because L and V learn about the burning town secrets while exploring their own turbulent teen emotions, as you do, which I thought was really beautifully interwoven. Just like exploring yourself, and there's also no questions. Like again, like I said, it's queer, but it's never like that's a problem. It's like V's a lesbian. Period. There's a trans witch. Done. Like not like it's beautifully woven into there. So, um,
yeah.
let's hop into spoiler town for the Lola Woods. Um, go read it. But the best friends can't agree on how to address the missing time. So Elle wants to investigate, to learn the truth, and ultimately do something about it. In a moment of vulnerability, she reveals to V that when she returned home from the theater that day, her underwear had been inside out, which obviously isn't the way she put them on in that morning. So, you know, and as alarming as this is to hear, V reacts in a way to save her own sanity. She simply does not want to know what happened to her and to have her peace of mind destroyed by the truth, which is totally valid. It's just, Ella's approaching it of like trying to force her to do this, and V is trying to escape. Like, instead of, like, addressing the issue, she's like, "I'll just leave." Like, we're just gonna leave the town that's toxic, and that'll fix everything, and Ella's like, "No, we have to address the problems of this town. Also, like, where could we go?" you know and so they have this falling out, and V had actually gone to talk with a local witch who's an older woman who has the appearance of a young girl, and this witch shares a remedy for the worries and concoction that would allow V to forget that she even forgot. It's explained that it softens the edges of the memory to appear as if there's no tear there, so she wouldn't even know that something had occurred that she should be worried about. And the witch remarks that this is a remedy that she makes the most. That women in the town are often asking for this, and because they can't figure out what happened to them, they can't know. So instead of having that gnaw away and eat at you, just forget that you don't know what happened to you, instead of having that shadow over you. And after a fight and a reconnecting, the girls find themselves at the witch's house once more. And while there, they learn the truth about Shudder to Think and the missing memories of women. Now, a lot of stuff happens in between then. Like I said, you learn about the sinkhole in the girl. You learn about there's a connection between L and V that is really strong to the point of like they can feel each other's emotions, even going as far as like if one person gets hurt, the other person will have the same scar. So that adds to like how peculiar the town is. You learn about how they met, you learn about how they trust each other and have this really deep connection just emotionally too. So I just wanted to get to the big reveal because that kind of tells a bit more. But those things definitely play into, especially the sinkhole. Like what happens is why there's a sinkhole is obviously like um, a manifestation of a pain that people can't remember they have, if that makes sense. So, because this stuff is happening to them, their body is reacting in a way, creating sinkholes. Um, Making that and it's also tied like the sinkholes happen when they're really happy and content, which is like, if you're a survivor and you have moments where you're happy, there are times where like those things just pop up because you feel like you shouldn't be happy and you don't deserve that. So it's very valid and a good representation of surviving trauma and assault. So Read the book. The witch tells them a story from her youth. And as a young girl, she would watch the mine workers walk to and from the mines. And one day, one of the men stopped by and knocked on her door. And he asked if she would go with him to see something beautiful, to which she says, yes, because she's a child. And he takes her to the sanatorium, which was for those with delicate sensibilities, usually women and sometimes queer folk. And he brings her to a fountain in the woods and asks her to drink the water. And after like looking at it, she yells no and screams for help and receives help from a woman in the sanatorium. And the man is arrested and the investigation begins. However, it doesn't get far before the man hangs himself in his cell. And the gossip in town was one of anger. The town's women suspecting a cover up happens because, like, how did he know? Because he was he traveled there for the mines. How did he know about the fountain? Um, there was a guard who let the man into the sanatorium. How did he know? Etc. So there's quite a few things where it's just like things aren't adding up here. Why is there even this fountain? Anyway, to help this young girl heal, they send her to the sanatorium where the woman who saved her begins teaching her witchcraft. And this woman is trans and explains her power and her abilities to do witchcraft and actually really helps her and becomes kind of like a mother figure to her. And this new witch learns magic and is told about the water at the sanatorium, which helps you forget or makes you forget. And so they refuse to drink. And eventually, they are searching for a remedy. And one day they find a magic mushroom. And the witch takes a small sip of the concoction and learns of the things she didn't even know she had forgotten. So she had thought, okay, I'm just going to learn about this one instance. And then she's flooded with memories because the time the man took her to the fountain was not the first time that he had done that. It was only the first time she had said no. And with her rage from learning the truth and from the violence the town inflicts on her friends and the other women, she works on a new spell, one that erupts the town into flames. So the townsmen had gotten very terribly corrupt with the water, and women were forced to forget so often that some of them forgot their own names, just broke them because they were subjected to that so many times, it just ruined them. The men grew lazy and wouldn't even bother returning them to where they had found the woman. They would just leave them in the spaces of assault and in questionable conditions, just like in their underwear. Clearly, something traumatic has happened to them. They don't know what it was. Now they have even more evidence that something terrible happened and don't know. And it would make them even more vulnerable. And like men were just doing this willy-nilly, not being held accountable, in like just ridiculous way. So the her anger in creating the spell was a result of that. And so the spell dragged these poisonous men to the fires, resulting in the skinless men. She wanted to be rid of them and for them to be stuck in torment. And anytime they try to get out, they'd be brought right back down to the eternal flames here. And to help the women forget and be free, the witch transformed them into the rabbits with human eyes and the deer woman. She thought that would be the best way to help them is just to kind of put them somewhere else, reduce the trauma, I guess. And in a rage, Elle explains that it should be the women's choice to remember or forget they forgot. So the three of them concoct two remedies, one to forget and one to remember, and they leave them for every woman to find, even the changed ones. So there's a scene where you see a rabbit turn into a woman, and you see that the deer woman um, doesn't take either. And at the end, well, Elle had eaten the mushrooms, but V is left with the choice, and you don't know which one she chose. And the Lola Woods is ultimately a haunting tale of societal suppression and abuse. And reflected in the simmering fires below, the hurt and pain is not something easily abated. If left unchecked, it will fester and infect the generations to come. And those girls won't know that the air shouldn't taste of fire until it's too late and they can no longer breathe. So that's my section. um, so again, read read it. It's super traumatizing, but it does have like a decent ending. And I was like, well, it's one of my favorite books this year, and I hope it inspires you to read more of Carmen's work and check out what she's doing because she's always up to something great. And yeah, let's learn about Centralia. um, well, Kat, why don't you tell us about the real horrors of Centralia because it's not quite as gross, I guess. It's gross in a different way. It's
Yeah,
gross
it's gross
because
in a
of
different
like
way, but, like, also still very gross, but also, like, I imagine, honestly, all towns have some variety of the version of the story that you talked about in that, like,
mhm,
the patriarchy is real and men are many times disgusting, doing horrible things to women without consent. So that seems like it'd be true. And also, like, a lot of what happened in Centralia seems to be a lot of people trying, well, gross men trying to make decisions for other human beings that have
mhm.
very much invasions of consent happening in a different way. In that this is like forced labor and exploitation, etc.